This is a great question. And I think at the core of Wikimedia and Wikipedia itself is just a belief in the goodness of people, honestly. And this is something that Jimmy Wales always says, is that at the heart of everything is just this belief that people, for the most part, just fundamentally want to do good. And the ideology behind taking a wiki and asking anyone in the world to contribute is that, for the most part, that's going to turn out pretty well, and people are going to find ways to contribute their knowledge to something that's greater than themselves and is going to last, hopefully for multiple lifetimes.
Hi, welcome to Innovative Minds. My pleasure to be here as your host. Just call me TaiwanPlus. This show is a forum for leaders in tech and politics to discuss how to solve today's problems with today's tools. Today, our special guest is Selena Deckelmann, Chief Product and Technology Officer at the Wikimedia Foundation. I'm also here with Taiwan's Digital Minister Audrey Tang. Today, we will discuss Wikimedia's role in free knowledge projects, its open source ideology, and the future of AI-assisted writing tools. Okay, so before we get started, I want to introduce our two guests today. Selena Deckelmann holds the position of Chief Product and Technology Officer at the Wikimedia Foundation, the nonprofit that hosts Wikipedia and other free knowledge projects. Previously, Selena was Senior Vice President at Mozilla, where she was responsible for all products and services for Firefox. She has more than 20 years of experience in open source technology, product management, and engineering leadership. Thank you so much for being here, Selena.
Thank you for having me.
Audrey Tang is Taiwan's Digital Minister. She became Taiwan's youngest minister without portfolio in 2016 when she headed the public digital innovation space. She has been a hacktivist for over 2 decades. She is also a promoter of open source innovation. Hi, Audrey.
Good local time, everyone, and hi to Selena for reconnecting after more than a decade.
So good to see you.
For starters, Selena, can you please briefly introduce yourself and describe your journey to becoming the Chief Product and Technology Officer at the Wikimedia Foundation?
Yeah, thank you so much. So my background, I started out, at the University of Oregon, learning about computer science and the internet from, a group of people who, mentors and just people who were really steeped in internet culture from the very beginning. It was a really exciting time because it was in the late 90s, early 2000s, and just lots was happening on the internet at that time. And, from there, I just developed a love of open source and free software. And I learned a lot about Linux at the time, and ended up having a career that allowed me to spend about 10 years working on Postgres, which is an open source database. And following that, I spent about a decade at Mozilla, working on, things related to Firefox, and then ultimately on Firefox itself. And now I'm here at the Wikimedia Foundation. And in each one of those areas that I explored, I'd say the common thread was just being able to contribute to the open internet and the open web, and just having the opportunity to learn from people who are really, really focused on, the commons and what we could do to bring knowledge, bring open source to the world.
Speaking of that, can you explain why open access and open source ideology are at the core of the Wikimedia Foundation's operations?
This is a great question. And I think at the core of Wikimedia and Wikipedia itself is just a belief in the goodness of people, honestly. And this is something that Jimmy Wales always says, is that at the heart of everything is just this belief that people, for the most part, just fundamentally want to do good. And the ideology behind taking a wiki and asking anyone in the world to contribute is that, for the most part, that's going to turn out pretty well, and people are going to find ways to contribute their knowledge to something that's like greater than themselves and is going to last, hopefully for multiple lifetimes. And so how, open access and open source ideology fit into that, it wouldn't be possible, to do this work without having open access and ultimately open source, underpinning all of it. And our mission is to create this knowledge, to disseminate it worldwide in perpetuity. And we believe that to do that, you need open access, you need open source so that all of this can last for a very long time.
This is a very noble and useful mission. Speaking of that, Audrey, as a self-taught individual, how have free knowledge projects impacted your personal growth?
Well, yeah, I dropped out of junior high with the blessing of the head of the school in 95, 96, when I was 15 years old. Unfortunately, there was no Wikipedia at the time, but there was the Gutenberg project and also archive. I talked about archive, the Cornell University project in the previous episode. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about Gutenberg project. So the Gutenberg project is my introduction to the idea of the commons, because the books that were digitized by the volunteers at the time were already out of copyright, which means that they were mostly written before the World Wars, which means that it's my initial introduction to humanities, to economics, and so on in a very optimistic era. So maybe my optimism stems from having limited access to copyrighted materials after the World Wars. But the great thing about Gutenberg project is that I'm not just a reader. Anytime I find a typo or a citation error or things like that, it just takes one email and to the maintainer so that they will incorporate the fixes and so on. And it's very empowering because in like real life, in institutions and so on, I was not even an adult. So a lot of my agency and certainly my voting rights were very limited. But then through contributing first to the Gutenberg project, just fixing typos, but eventually editing the documentations of the free software community like Perl and so on, and all the way working with the IETF community, the W3C community, and so on. All it takes is an email. So for someone who at the time doesn't even speak fluent English, to be recognized by the peers community as a contributor to a large community, I think that is my formative years, and it always have shaped my optimism, exactly as Selena said, that people are mostly good and can do good together when there is a community to foster such contributions.
That's an amazing story. I love that. And I just want to add that my first open source contribution was because of an email where I sent a Perl script to someone, and I was extremely flattered and honored when this happened. I sent them a Perl script and they were like, I love this. This is something other people can learn from. And they committed it to the project that I, had sent the email about. And I later met that person in person at a conference like many years later. And I was struggling to like get words out. I was so excited. But yeah, I mean, it's just kind of amazing how the culture that existed then of being able to just reach out and send an email and have such an impact. I mean, it's powerful. And I feel that in Wikipedia today, that power of being able to make a change and see it happen and collaborate with others. It's really a wonderful thing in the world.
And Selena, I think you touch upon another important thing in that it feels like a kins group, a tribe even, that is global in nature. So that instead of just talking with people who are physically close to us, we're talking with people who are like value-wise or ideology-wise very close to us, so much so that sometimes it feels like an extended family, but in reality, they belong to very different cultures, very different ethnicities, and certainly very different time zones. So it's almost like that we have a global community, and I can just visit any city at any given time. During that days of pro-mongers, I can always find a pro-monger group or a Linux meetup group, and so on. And nowadays, certainly Wikipedia editors and so on.
Thank you for sharing those wonderful stories. Now, I would like to discuss a specific topic with you, which is the Creative Commons license. Selena, since June 2023, all content generated by Wikimedia projects is now licensed under the Creative Commons 4.0cc license suite. Could you please clarify how this change will affect Wikipedia users worldwide?
I think that, anytime we undertake one of these updates, it's not just an administrative change. There's actually quite a bit that goes into license updates, regardless of which license it is. But for this particular one, some of the things that we were excited to see was, making it much clearer to reusers how to credit the original author. This is always like an area of challenge. And I think another area was enabling people to fix attribution errors or mistakes like in a much more reasonable time. So this was really important to help address some more kind of simple mistakes without requiring like really aggressive copyright enforcement demands. And that makes people more willing, I think, to use their theory anyway, is it makes them more willing to use these licenses because there's ways other than being very aggressive, to meet the terms of the license. We also were really interested in making it a much more international license with official translations in over 30 languages, and then to continue to offer translation, in as many languages as we possibly can. So those are some of the reasons. I mean, it's, in part, just part of our regular maintenance and upkeep of our licensing agreements, but also these other issues were important to us.
I understand that there are administrative and operational details involved in choosing which license to use. However, I'm curious as to why it took almost 10 years to implement the Creative Commons 4.0cc license suite.
Well, I I don't know that I'm going to give a 100% satisfactory answer to this. Part of it has to do with the way that we work with all of the volunteers in the communities, which is that we make changes at the pace that we think we can make those changes with the community, as opposed to maybe, I don't know how to say this exactly, but as opposed to maybe being more confrontational or making a change that people might not be ready for. So there's a thing that we do called a consultation process, where we raise issues, we publish them on different wikis, and then we have a very robust conversation, or you might call it a debate. Some folks who have used Wikipedia for a long time might be familiar with the talk page for every wiki page that exists. And what happens when you look at that talk page, it's a bunch of editors having a conversation about the text of the page. We do that for issues like licensing changes or other policy changes that are really important to, the global, we call it the movement of Wikimedia projects. And that's part of it. It's not the only reason. I'm sure there's maybe there was just some administrative delays and we were, just prioritization. But I think at the heart of it is really that consultation process and making sure that we're bringing the community along. They really understand the value of it before we make the changes, and they're with us, when we finally execute on the change.
I think that is a perfectly satisfactory answer. Turning to Audrey, as part of your commitment to radical transparency, which copyright license has your ministry adopted for the materials provided on its website, and why did you make that choice?
So personally, I adopted CC0 quite publicly for all my open source. Well, CC0 is not open source, free software works in 2009, and that was the year that CC0 was invented. It was invented for a very specific purpose. It is to relinquish as much right as possible into the commons so that it's compatible with all the other free software and open source licenses. And the reason why I did that was because there was a lot of conversation in the Perl community leading up to now Raku, previously Perl 6, conversation about licensing. And I just want to focus on making contributions instead of licensing conversations. But interestingly, it works very well as a public servant. So when I joined the cabinet in 2016, I found out that as a public servant, anything that I create in order to carry out my duties, if it's textual, meaning that speeches, news releases, proclamations, other documents are not copyrightable anyway. In the Taiwanese copyright law, they're public domain, which means that it's not subject to copyright. On the other hand, if it has like utility, instrumental uses, and things like that, then it becomes copyrightable, and the copyright being owned by the ministry or the government. But the line between instrumental code and speech is very, very blurred, and it's getting blurred by the day because of AI and all that. And so instead of making arbitrary distinctions, like this is public domain data, but next to it is something that may have some instrumental uses, and so it's open source, and which license should we choose, and so on, I simply continued my use of Creative Commons Zero, which means that part of it may be public domain, and part of it may be copyrightable by my employer, which is the Taiwanese government, but we decide to relinquish the copyright anyway. So the bundle, that is to say the text and code and everything, become a infrastructure level commons, meaning that it's not just compatible with particular applications, but can be used for any applications, even the ones beyond our recognition, right? There's hip hop bands in Japan that remix it, my interviews and so on, into rap songs and so on. And so I couldn't have predicted that when I did that very serious interview, right? So I think the great thing about free cultural works is that I wake up and I see a remix far beyond my comprehension. My head goes like this. But again, I'm very interested in working with not just like coders and designers and so on, but also artists and musics and things like that. Yeah.
That's amazing. I love that. I love that you've done that. I mean, it's similarly in the U.S. Works of public servants, works of the government are public domain. I'm not sure actually about individual interviews and things like that, you know, like how that works, but it's that use of the public domain has been part of my life, you know, in the US. Yeah. Anyway, I didn't know that. So thank you for asking that question and sharing that.
Yeah, and I think the federal government a few years back looked at the copyright law and saw that, for example, the NASA imagery that everybody uses, as per the U.S. copyright law, is public domain, but only in the U.S. That is to say, it's free to use by any U.S. citizen. But again, it's almost impossible to enforce that if you're a non-U.S. citizen, you have to give citation, but if you're a U.S. citizen, you don't. It's a nightmare. So they just summarily switch to copyright free, like CC0, for those things as well. Yeah.
I love that. I love that direction. I think for me, when I am thinking about the future of the licensing for Wikipedia content specifically, but all of the Wikimedia projects, I think about like how to continue to encourage the creation of that content when it's not a government project. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, you know, I can see the value of making the choice. But I worry about the motivation, you know, to contribute to something larger than yourself and not knowing who or why or what, which I think is a little bit different in the government context, but I'll just say it's something that I do think about, and it's worth coming back to and, you know, re-examining on a regular basis.
Yeah, no, in my copious spare time, not defending the election against foreign cyber attacks, I'm also writing a book at plurality.net. And the book is Creative Commons Zero, of course, free of copyright. But there is a experiment going on called Gov for Git. So instead of relying on a public blockchain or something, we just rely on a equally distributed ledger, which is Git, and signed commits. And the idea is that the more you commit, the more voice you have when it comes to vote prioritization of pull requests, of contributions, and so on. So the more you contribute, the more rights on governance you get on coordinating the book project. And so I think a lot of people contribute not because they can sue others for copyright violation, but rather they want the portfolio, right? They want the provenance, the full contribution history, and equally importantly, not getting misquoted or misappropriated into somewhere they don't see their ideas belong. And so by very clearly delineating the authentication, provenance, and things like that, I think there are non-copyright ways to ensure the same, I would say, management rights or even other rights, governance rights into a project that nevertheless provides the same intrinsic contribution. I think in the open source world, we measure with like kudos, karma, and things like that. And now with Git, we can finally like quantize it in a way that is transferable across projects.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I'll just say, connecting it back to the projects that I work on, it's definitely noticed, how many contributions someone has made to Wikipedia across like all of the different kinds of wikis, and there's different kinds of capabilities that you get access to depending on how many contributions you have made. And that's something that we've worked with the community on to establish over time. And there's things that we help people get access to. There's an amazing resource called the Wikipedia Library. And it's a resource that gives people access to primary sources, but you have to make like a certain number of contributions in order to get access to it. And then there's other kinds of work that people do. Basically, what I think of it as like, if you were to compare it to another social media platform, it'd be like moderation work, but reviewing different types of edits over time. And the way that people kind of determine whether or not you're ready for that kind of responsibility is based on your contributions up until that point. So I think that ecosystem, like a similar one exists, and it works like pretty well in practice. I mean, there's always, details in there where you wish it might work a little bit better, but I think it's been working pretty well for quite a few years now.
Great.
So over the past 22 years, Wikipedia has grown to become the world's largest encyclopedia, with billions of visits every month. However, there are some risks that threaten the project's sustainability, such as data commercialization, censorship, and technological advancements. To tackle these challenges, the Wikimedia Foundation has launched the Wikimedia 2030 movement strategy. Can you please provide more information about this strategy's background?
Yeah, absolutely. Like many things that, started from an idea that a small number of people have and then grew incredibly and organically, that has a lot of strengths to it, the vastness that you just described, but there are some areas where there's risks and weaknesses. And this is part of what that movement strategy was trying to address. One of the areas that the, volunteers and the foundation wanted to think together about were opportunities to diversify, the content and the contributors across all of the different projects. And they called that effort knowledge equity. So the ways in which we think about knowledge equity have a lot to do, in terms of like what we can analyze, have a lot to do with knowledge gaps. And so there's a series of really interesting research projects where we've tried to assess and quantify the areas of knowledge gaps and where we think people can best apply effort in the future to improve it. So that's like fascinating, really impactful work. And what it's resulted in are a series of wiki projects where groups of volunteers are taking the identified knowledge gaps and then creating these massive projects to like close those gaps. It's really incredible work, that my teams are part of like making happen now. It's very exciting. Another piece of this, getting to like the essential infrastructure part of the challenge, is thinking about how how do we create knowledge infrastructure that continues to support what Wikipedia in particular has become, over these last many years. And the thinking there is enabling that third-party reuse ecosystem, and how do we continue to do that, and also, like, first of all, create all of that knowledge and disseminate it, but then also, like, help another, like, the next generation of, consumers, readers, maybe viewers come back to and contribute to the creation of free knowledge later on. So this is like a huge challenge. We have no idea, really, frankly, and neither do the folks who originally worked on the movement strategy starting in 2016. We really don't know how to do this, but we're launching like a series of experiments to try to figure this out. And some of this is just observing, like looking out there, like things that are happening on TikTok or Instagram today that are really attracting like a lot of people to certain types of knowledge. And then thinking about the ways that we can connect that with the work that our volunteers produce. And what we're noticing is that, Wikipedia like articles often are the foundation for a lot of this content that people are producing. And so that's like really interesting to learn. And then, how do we then excite the audiences that are like thrilled to be like seeing those videos being made by these creators? How do we like entice them to come and contribute back to the commons? I think this is a really profound question. Like, I think that the web was kind of set up for this. And I think that some of these newer platforms that have emerged are not. So this is like, I think it's a profound challenge. What can we do? What can we think about in these new platforms? What other new platforms could we create that become more of like a creator ecosystem? I think this is like a really interesting place that basically the whole world needs to go. It's really important for me and really important for Wikipedia, but I also think it's really important for the world to think about, if it's not going to be the web, if people are going to create new platforms for sharing knowledge, like how do we make sure that it's a participatory platform? And I personally don't think that we have an answer to that yet.
When you said that those video and short video platforms are not set up for the same kind of engagement that Wikipedia had, do you mean that it's harder to mark things as like Creative Commons attribution? Because in YouTube, it's actually very easy. It's a setting that says that, my channel is Creative Commons 4.0 attribution. And so all the short and long clips I upload to it are automatically in the Commons, which enables like transcripts and community contributed editing of the translated transcript and things like that. Are these not compatible with like just infusing them back to the Wikipedia projects, or are you talking about something that's not in the licensing technical layer?
Yeah, I'm thinking of not in the licensing technical layer. I'm thinking about how do we share what we think is true. Mm-hmm. So I totally agree. I think that the there's not really a technical barrier at all to the making sure that things are in the commons, but then synthesizing. That's what I think is a challenge. I don't think we've really solved that question for video. How to synthesize video in a way and create something. I don't know that it would ever be like a Wikipedia article in text, right? Like I don't really know what it would be, but how does one take like things that are in the commons or not and make sense of it, and then say, okay, this is like what we think the truth is? Because the way that we've, come to solve it today with Wikipedia is to have like a textual debate. And I think these other platforms, and that's something that the web enables, right, with web technology. But I'm not really sure how to do it in these other platforms.
Yeah, so I think in the mainstream world, the closest we've seen is the X.com, previously Twitter, community notes, which enable community textual annotations on videos. So if you have a viral short video that is lacking context, you see like the jury, right? Volunteer contributors to the community notes just swarming on it, and the best community annotation that speak to different ideologies. Those are bridge making, flow to the top, very similar on how a rough consensus flows out of a talk page on Wikipedia. But then exactly as you said, those products are still textual, even though the annotated thing is a video. It did take a textual debate. A lot of my research recently is on this, right? So we work with a project called Talk to the City that look at the videos and transcripts and so on, and for particular moments in time that they can translate into a factual statement or opinion statement and so on. They use language models to synthesize the voice so that the synthetic avatar can become an editor or facilitator or debater. But that relies on a language model that is currently totally a black box. And so it needs to be coupled with trustworthy models, multimodal models, in order to make this work and respect the original intention and dignity of the video contributors. They must have a say in tuning it, so to speak. But I do think previously it's very easy to make video out of text. But the other way around has always been hard. But I think multimodal models are here to help. We just need to ensure that it grows up to be a responsible citizen and not a monster among us.
I love that. So the research that I've seen around the discussions, I haven't seen as much research on what happens when people engage with the community notes. I'm not sure, like how much that's been researched at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm very interested in what you're talking about the community discussions, because one of the things that we've observed when people engage with those textual discussions on the talk pages, it tends to have a moderating effect on their views, even if they come to the page with a very strong bias or a very strong opinion. Through the process of that conversation, they not necessarily find a middle ground, but moderate their views. I think that's a really powerful effect, and something that I think is important for the world online, given that there's a lot of online spaces where the opposite thing happens. People become more extreme in their views. So I'm really interested in how we can make that happen in every modality, honestly.
Yes, a safe space for everyone.
Yeah.
Let's now discuss how large language models, or LLMs, can improve open access to information, as their integration brings great opportunities but also some challenges. So Selena, how has the Wikimedia Foundation responded to the growth of LLMs in recent months?
Yeah, great question. I think for lots of organizations and companies, it's been a very exciting and kind of wild time where there's changes coming basically every day, some that you can anticipate and some that you can't. And so for us, it's been the same, very exciting, but also sort of breakneck speed. And we've been doing our best to both work with our volunteers and help them with the problems that they're facing and the fears that they have about what's coming. Continue to support the large language model work and machine learning work that we've been doing for quite a long time, with the communities, and that the communities themselves, have been creating bots that process information on Wikipedia and solve problems for themselves for quite a long time. And then just, continuing to experiment, so we were excited to create a ChatGPT plugin just to look at the ways in which we could help with attribution, because, we saw immediately that people were asking questions that, could be answered by Wikipedia, but sometimes the answers that were coming out of ChatGPT were not necessarily accurate. So, is there a way, for us to help with that right away? So that was the intent behind that plugin. And then apart from that, we also are interested in using large language models to solve other problems. Like, for example, better and more accurate translation in a wider variety of languages, a larger number of languages and languages that might not be addressed by commercial providers. And so we have this project called Mint that, some folks in the languages team have stood up. And right now it's enabling translation in several languages that are just not available. Like, for example, Cherokee is something that we're going to support inside our projects, and it's not yet really available in others. Like other things that we're working on, we're also really interested in this summarization capability that Audrey mentioned. This would be very helpful to our editors because they have robust debates on really important topics. And sometimes those debates, like the amount of text that's there, it could take someone who's trying to summarize it, many, many hours, let's say like 8 hours to like read through that and then do the processing work. So if we can find ways of accurately summarizing and giving them tools to analyze, that would be very helpful to them. And I think the last area that we're kind of, exploring and really interested in projects to help volunteers around is in the space of like anti-spam, denial of service attacks, those types of things that can affect the wikis. It's a real, issue right now. And, we have some defenses, but we need more. So it's an area of active development and exploration, like in concert with the editors who've been looking at these issues for a long time.
I understand. Language models have impressive capabilities, but they still require human oversight. Many thanks to Audrey and Selena for joining us today. We will continue our discussion in the second part of the interview. And if you like today's episode, be sure to subscribe, share, and let us know what you think. See you next time on Innovative Minds.
Yeah, I think the lens that is a great question, and it could be seen as in conflict potentially with like other pillars of the movement. The way that I interpreted this particular statement was in the context of knowledge equity, and that it's possible for a situation to be viewed from different perspectives and have different meaning for different people. At one point in time, even like people can have different perspectives on the same situation, but also over time, like our understanding of a situation might evolve as we add more information to it, or just like kind of change our understanding and grow. So that's like part of what I see as the kind of challenge there. But also, I think that certain aspects of a situation might be more or less relevant to a person depending on their age and circumstances. Hello, I am Selena Deckelmann. I am the Chief Product and Technology Officer for the Wikimedia Foundation. See you on TaiwanPlus.
Hello, I'm Audrey Tang, Taiwan's Digital Minister. See you on TaiwanPlus.